That class was awful. No other class matched how awful it was. Luckily, I passed. Barely. Hello, I am GD, your host and writer for Out of Context. This is my third channel update, and is intended to cover who I am. It's a long story, so let's continue. During grade 9, I discovered another problem. In elementary school, most children would gather in big groups and leave large patches of the schoolyard open during recess. In high school, there was no recess and no big yard, so students would instead gather in small groups all throughout the school. There were no relatively quiet and yet interesting places to be, unless you managed to find a group of people to hang out with. Between my desire to observe and my desire to remain safe and secure, I wasn't going to have much choice. That is, unless I lived in the library surrounded by books. I'd hate that. Luckily, I did manage to find one group of people. However, I describe my initial relationship as something like this. I drift from spot to spot, just outside your property, looking over occasionally while avoiding eye contact, waiting until someone invites me over. Worst introduction ever. But I had no idea how to be straightforward and open about how I felt and what I wanted. More precisely, I wasn't sure how to determine who I could trust. Eventually, I got my invitation, free of charge. They were nice people, mostly. I think I liked them mostly because I didn't have to be a part of their conversations. I could listen and observe, and to me, that's all I ever really wanted out of a social environment. Fly on the wall status. But sometimes I did talk. Generally, it wasn't about me or my daily life. It would be about some game concept that I had put together, something far removed, objectively, from my own life, but something that only I had the ability to talk about, my own topic of conversation. But, as I said, they were nice people, mostly. During my time in high school, there were two problems. Two people problems. One was a girl, 2 years my senior. One was a boy, 2 years my junior. The girl I eventually met when I became a part of that group. People seemed to like her, maybe. At the very least, they didn't chase her off. She would spare no expense, making fun of my appearance, my face in particular, or harassing us while we played video games, like Worms Armageddon, on our laptops, my brother's and mine. She even tried pouring water on my brother's laptop while he was doing something outside with the group. She scampered back to her boyfriend, who was also part of the group, claiming that she wasn't scared of us. If only she knew. But I wasn't going to risk life in prison for her. That's what fantasies are for. The boy, 2 years my junior, I met earlier in the village where I lived. He was friends with the first friendly acquaintance I made there. Unfortunately, after meeting that boy for the first time, my friendly acquaintanceship ended in an awkward non-consensual manner. His presence in our lives was less than tolerable. My brother fought him once, after continual harassment on our bus ride to and from school. My mother's husband suggested that I should fight him, earn his respect, but that wouldn't happen. I don't mean that he wouldn't respect us if we gave him a good fight. I mean that my mind was not so stable as to allow myself a simple fight. I was convinced that if I fought him, one of us would die, because I was fed up with his harassment. If I held in my feelings, no one would get hurt other than me, because if I fought him with the feelings I held in my heart, I was convinced that I would kill him. And because violence in a civil society is not tolerated, I would likely kill myself thereafter. After all, there was a bridge and dam not too far away. One jump is all it would take for both of us. I had other people problems, but these two were the biggest ones I had to endure. Honestly, talking about it gets my malice raging again. And there were nights back then where these conflicts, these harassments, were too much for me to handle. I would cry and rage, separately and all at once, all in my head, because there wasn't a single being in this world that I could trust with my feelings. It got so bad that the moment I saw their faces, I was seething with malice. I was hoping that they would make the mistake of going too far, finally going beyond my tolerance, that I would finally extinguish their existence. It wasn't healthy, but my body developed strange countermeasures to help deal with my malice. For her, my fantasy sabotaged the malice-inducing image of her presence. In one instance, she was an emotionless automaton of a living corpse. And while I was emotionally broken, silently crying uncontrollably, she made love to me. It didn't change her real personality, but it helped me to perceive her as more than her bullying actions would suggest. At the very least, her existence became tolerable until 11th grade, when I discovered that she had left school. This is why I suspect that she was 2 years my senior. For him, the solution was not the same. My attraction was towards women, and arguably, nothing had to be done. After he fought with my brother, my mother and her husband went to see his parents, and it seemed like he was, in a manner of speaking, placed on a watch list. At the very least, harassment was reduced. But not everything we experienced was awful there. During grade 9, I met someone in my physical education class, or phys ed class. They were friendly, but not really remarkable, at least not until grade 11 or so. Now, grade 11 was my second least academically successful year of high school, grade 9 being my first least. But in that year of high school, I began to accumulate acquaintanceships with friendly people who played video games. In particular, a group of us would play StarCraft Brood War. Now, I wasn't very good initially. I didn't really understand how investing in resource income by using what I assumed to be a large number of resources would accrue resources faster and simultaneously be an efficient investment. But I studied what the AI opponent would do and tried imitating it. Suddenly, I wasn't too bad, and I managed to do well. Then, I started playing against human opponents, rushed by 6 Zerglings. I started strategizing. I picked Terran as my faction of choice, and I discovered that I could build one SCV and then save resources until I had enough to build a barracks. I managed to create a build order that would allow you to train Marines, construct SCVs, build supply depots, without really sacrificing any efficiency. Not to mention, I became immune to those pesky Zergling rushes. Pretty soon, we started getting into strategy wars with one another. I won't say I was a pro, but I was strong enough to force my opponent to change strategies multiple times, change factions from Zerg to Protoss, and allow them to play the late game because my early game was just too oppressive. One of my opponents, the friend from Phys Ed, even insisted we play matches with multiple AI opponents to make the game more interesting, but really, he just wanted to delay me finding him. Eventually, we agreed to play special cooperative maps with extreme conditions and work together to win. Grade 12, both first and second years, ended up being my best academically and the least stressful of all my years in schooling, including elementary schooling. Grade 12 English was actually my second best, with a final percentage of 90, if I recall correctly. No book reports, thankfully. It felt like I had survived the worst of it. Once I had finished acquiring all of the necessary credits needed to finish high school, I was hoping to take some time to assess my life. School made it hard to focus on the psychological mayhem I had experienced over my life, and I wanted to better understand why and how it all happened. More importantly, I wanted to understand how to apply myself and be happy consistently for once. But that wasn't going to happen. My mother and her husband had done enough with their renovations of the property and wanted to move. They decided on another old home, like ours, but in an even more isolated location. This meant that the few friends and friendly acquaintances I had would be disappearing from my life. And to make matters more complicated, there was a college a few hours' drive away from the new residence. It seemed that we were going to be enrolled at that new college while commuting back and forth between college and home. This is not what I wanted, but it felt like I didn't have a choice. We were looking at a booklet showing all of the courses they were providing. My brother and I stumbled onto 2 programs showcased in the booklet. Computer programming was one of them. Computer networking security was the other. Now, I was still remembering my time in high school when we would play StarCraft together with our gaming buddies over our lunch and empty class periods, or spares as we called them. We would use StarCraft's LAN peer-to-peer connection method to connect our laptops to the session we created. LAN is an acronym for Local Area Network. Generally, we had no issues with connecting to each other, but I didn't really understand the technology. I figured that understanding it would provide a more comfortable gaming experience for those people that played games with me. This seemed to be an interest to me, and at the time, I couldn't consider any other field of study. It seemed I was obsessed with this idea. No other gaming sessions would have technical difficulties due to lack of understanding regarding computer networking technology. So, I chose to take the computer networking security course. My brother chose computer programming. I didn't disclose the true reasons for my choice to my mother or her husband. They didn't have an appreciation for video games like I and my brother did. In fact, they opposed us using them. The reasons for their opposition were complicated. My mother thought that they were harmful to us, intellectually and spiritually. Her husband had sort of the same opinion, but also believed that they were a distraction from life and academics. This is because of an incident that happened with his own son. But we won't talk about that for now. Needless to say, I didn't trust my mother with my reason for taking such a course. I simply told her I was interested in it. Nothing more. Thank you for listening in. Have a wonderful day.